I used to think silence was just the absence of sound. Turns out, silence has weight. It sits on your chest and makes you count your breaths like change. The day we buried Glenn Darby felt like that heavy silence paid in installments. I stood behind the last column in the church, where delivery guys and latecomers hover, not where a son-in-law usually stands. The front pew was roped off for family. Technically, I qualified. Practically, I was decor something you walk around and pretend not to notice. Karina sat up front beneath an arrangement of lilies big enough to demand its own seat. Her coat was perfect, her posture straighter than the marble saints, and at her side was a man in polished gold loafers who looked like he'd studied effortless presence on YouTube. He put a proprietary hand on the small of her back as she bowed her head. I watched his fingers move in small circles, like he was buffing out an imagined scratch. After the service, the crowd pushed toward the steps. Steam rose from the street grates, and cold air crowded under my collar. People were already splitting into the after-funeral camps, cigarette talkers, casserole carriers, and those who pretend to leave, then wait for an invite back inside. Karina's laugh cut through the murmur the way glass chimes cut wind. She knows how to place a sound in a room. She knows how to place a person, too. She drifted past me with a thin smile that acknowledged me without admitting me, her clutch tucked under her arm like a folded document. When the gold loafers guy excused himself to take a call, she pivoted toward me as though we were colleagues who'd once shared a funny memo. "Thank you for keeping your distance inside," she said. It was appropriate. "That what we're calling it now?" I said. Her gaze slid past me to catch the reflection of herself in the glass of the church door. "Owen, please don't make this harder." "On who?" She tilted the clutch to adjust the clasp, and a corner of paper winked out. I didn't mean to look, the way you don't mean to look when a car door opens into traffic, but my name was there in 12-point font, black on white, black V, black, filed date, last week, before the heart attack, before the flowers and speeches. My name looked interesting and bold, like it belonged to a person with sharper edges than I knew myself to have. Karina noticed what I'd noticed. She didn't even flinch. She was good like that. She slid the paper back in, and the clutch clicked shut, like a sentence ending. "You knew we were moving toward this," she said. "I thought it would be cleaner after, given everything." "After your father's funeral," I said. She didn't correct me. Glenn had told me once that PR is 90% knowing which words to leave alone. Karina left that one alone and put a hand on my arm the way reporters put a hand on a microphone. "I'll reach out through counsel," she said. "I think that's best." "Sure," I said. "Best." Then the man in gold loafers called her name. Ka-ri-na, like a brand, and she brightened in a way I hadn't seen in years. She stepped into his orbit. I stepped out of the church shadow and into the steam. The will reading took place 2 days later in a conference room with heavy carpet and silent windows. The kind of place that makes grief feel like a dress code. The trustee, a man named Hollister whose voice sounded like a breakfast commercial, arranged the papers in a fan and explained the structure. Glenn had left several charitable gifts, a bequest to staff, and set aside money for a scholarship in his mother's name. Karina's eyes didn't move for those parts. Mine tracked the rustle of paper like it might cut me. "To Miss Karina Darby Black," Hollister said with a practiced pause, "a cash bequest of $1 million. Karina's chin lifted half a degree. Gold loafers. Guy, who had made himself comfortable across the room like a well-dressed fern, exhaled quietly. "And the residue of the estate, real property, business interests, cash assets, and all remaining personal property shall pass to Mr. Owen Black." Silence stopped being weight and became a blade slicing through the carpet. A chair leg squealed. Someone's breath snagged. "I'm sorry," I said, because it felt like the only true sentence in the room. Hollister kept reading. There were trust terms and executor instructions, and I heard about 1 word in 10. Karina's face regained its neutral public setting. Her shoelace of a smile tightened. The gold loafers shifted, and their owner examined his phone like it had just texted him etiquette. When Hollister finished, he asked if there were questions. There were always questions. He had the patient look of a man who knows this is the part where adults become toddlers. Karina found her voice first. "This must be some mistake," she said. The word mistake came out not as a possibility, but as a press release. "The documents have been reviewed and properly executed," Hollister said. He had a way of making "properly executed" sound like something done to a person, not by them. Karina stood. The room was not allowed to be taller than she was. That was one of her unwritten rules. "Excuse me," she said, and walked out. The gold shoes followed, tapping a fast, bright rhythm down the hall. I stepped into the corridor to breathe. The window at the end showed a cold rectangle of river. My name was new to the taste of wealth. It didn't fit in my mouth. I've been a depot tech for years. Barcodes, pallets, and timing are my vocabulary. Money lives in other people's sentences. When I came back into the room, Hollister was fanning a thin packet. "There is one additional document you should be aware of," he said. "Additional like a cherry on top?" I said, my voice frayed. "Or additional like a fuse?" He slid the packet across the table. "An addendum. C, to be precise." The title sat there like it knew it didn't need to be bold. Addendum C, conditional non-contact provision. I read the first paragraph twice before the meaning sorted itself. 18 months. No contact with Karina. Not in person, not by intermediary, not through litigation beyond unavoidable procedural necessities. No touching, no dinners, no nostalgia, no "we should talk." If the condition was breached, 40% of the estate would be redirected to a specific beneficiary, a dog sanctuary Glenn had funded quietly for years in western Massachusetts. The addendum called it a sanctuary. Later, I would see the place and understand that was the correct word. "Is this a punishment?" I asked. Hollister shook his head. Mr. Darby stated on several occasions that this was not punitive. He called it a safeguard. He was careful with words. I turned the page. Glenn's signature was there, precise and final, 2 witnesses, the trustee's stamp, legal heir, sealed and notarized. "What if she tries to make contact?" I said. "The clause is framed as a restriction on you," he said. "But Mr. Darby anticipated potential incitements." He glanced at a line item. "Your compliance can be demonstrated through logs, testimony, retained counsel. The burden is on you not to approach." 40% goes to dogs, I said, not to be flippant, but because this was the strangest sentence I'd ever had to hold steady in my head. "Correct," Hollister said. "A sanctuary on a substantial acreage. He visited often, I'm told." On the way out, I passed the building's lobby where a veterans charity was collecting coats. A volunteer with calm eyes and a service dog nodded at me. The dog looked up, unbothered. When the elevator doors closed, it was the first time that day I felt like any kind of person was looking at me without expectation. The next morning, Karina came to my work. You know what looks wrong in a depot? A woman in a tailored coat and heels that don't apologize for their own noise. She waited near the punch clock until the foreman sent someone to fetch me like I was a fire to be put out. "Owen," she said, sharp smile, lower voice. "Walk?" We stepped into the alley behind the loading bay. The air smelled like cardboard and diesel, the scent of my adulthood. "We need to be practical," she said. "Practical is a word rich people use before they move furniture and call it justice. I know you're overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed too." "You filed before the funeral," I said. "That looks like the opposite of overwhelmed." Her eyes flickered. "My father and I had discussed transitions. He wanted things settled." "Settled," I said. "You can't manage this," she said softly, almost kindly. "The properties, the business interests, even the staff. This is not your world, it's mine. I can help move things into structures that make sense. For both of us, we can craft statements that preserve dignity." "I was furniture," I said. It was a realization and a sentence at the same time. "In your palace. You walked around me for years. Now you want me to believe I can't lift my own weight." She exhaled and stepped closer, eyes shining in that controlled way. "PR people cry. I don't want us to hurt each other. I care about you." "It's interesting to hear that word said to me now," I said. "Care." Her attention darted to the door as a forklift beeped in reverse. She pulled me a half step deeper into the alley, and it was muscle memory to lean in. 11 years of leaning in. I caught myself. A thought arrived. 40% of Glenn's last will asleep in a field, waiting to become dog food and medicine and hay. "There's an addendum," I said. "What?" she said, too fast. 18 months, I said. "No contact. If I break it, 40% goes to a sanctuary. Dogs." The control in her face cracked. "Not fully, but a hairline." "That's absurd," she said. "He wouldn't." "He did." She swallowed. "Owen, this is obviously something we can navigate," I said. "Craft, spin. Yes, those are your verbs." She stepped back into her armor. "You can't possibly intend to follow that. That's not enforceable." "The trustee says it is." She looked over my shoulder at the warehouse, as if she could call in a camera crew and make this disappear in post. "You're going to let him control you from the grave." Maybe he's protecting me, I said. From you, from myself. I walked back inside. She didn't follow. That night, a junior associate from the trustee's firm, her name was Amelia, voice clear as cold water, called to say there were materials I should review. Mr. Darby kept a precise paper trail, she said. He expected pushback. He seemed fond of contingency. Seemed fond of dogs, too, I said. She laughed, surprised into it. Yes, she said, that too. The materials turned out to be a banker's box waiting for me in a small conference room the following afternoon. Amelia met me at the door in a navy sweater and an expression that said she'd learned to deliver strange news kindly. She had an orderly stack of folders and a legal pad with rows of paper clips lined up like soldiers at inspection. Start here, she said, touching a folder labeled correspondence. Then this. She set her hand on one marked Estate Library Access. There's a USB drive. We'll talk about that after. I leafed through emails printed and tabbed, Glenn to the trustees, trustees to outside counsel, dated months before his death. There was careful language around Addendum C. He insisted on specific phrasing, especially the part making it my restriction and my choice, not hers. There were also 6 emails referencing a conversation with Karina about document housekeeping. In one, Glenn relayed that Karina had asked whether obsolete addenda could be retired to simplify administration. He had responded that any changes required full formalities. Another email noted that Karina had expressed urgency, and a follow-up from outside counsel calmly reminded that urgency was never a reason to skip procedure. She tried to bury it, I said. Amelia gave a small nod. She tried to see if it could be removed. Not uncommon in general, she added, to keep her tone professional. But in this case, she didn't secure the required signatures. The addendum remained in force. I turned to the Estate Library Access folder, a sign-out sheet for a room in Glenn's townhouse. The library showed dates, times, and key holders. Next to each entry was a scribble indicating the house manager who'd released the key. One name appeared more than others, a groundsman named Milton Gale. There was a note in a different hand beside his name, USN Vet, calm, trusted. Milton has a key to the interior safe as well, Amelia said. He's worked for the family for years. Mr. Darby relied on him. The USB drive was in a labeled sleeve, Library, July 10th. Amelia slid a laptop across the table, plugged in the drive, and turned the screen toward me. I previewed it, she said. It's candid. The file opened to a security camera angle from the far corner of the library. You could see the double doors, the rug, the leather chairs, the glass-fronted cases with their rows of books that exist to tell you what kind of man reads them. The timestamp put it at 11:42 p.m. Karina entered, alone, and stood in the doorway with the posture of someone about to apologize to her room. Glenn followed. He wore a robe and held a drinking glass. He closed the doors behind him with a soft click that felt loud on screen. Dad, Karina said, voice even, we can't keep him tethered to me. That's cruel. This is not about cruelty, Glenn said. The camera flattened his voice but not its temperature. It's about clarity. He won't survive that much money, she said. You know he won't. He'll drown in it. He doesn't know this world. He knows himself, Glenn said. Better than you think. He is not from our world, she said, the phrase crisp and cold as a blade. He was a project. I tried. I really tried. You tried to build a man and discovered he was already one, Glenn said, so you redecorated him in your head. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes like she could rub a different answer out. Your staff respects me. Your board listens to me. Why can't you? Because this is not work, he said. This is my will, and will is about the version of love that cuts clean. I won't let you do this, she said. I'll fix it. You can't remove a lock by declaring yourself the locksmith, he said. That's not how doors work. The video ended with the two of them staring each other down like strangers across a table at a polite war. My hands were cold. Amelia closed the file and ejected the drive as if more exposure might damage it. There's one more item, she said carefully, pulling a letter from an envelope with my name in Glenn's neat hand. She didn't open it, just placed it in front of me. He asked that this be given to you if the death was sudden. I broke the seal. The letter was short because in the end, the man never spent 2 words where one would do. Owen, if I go of my own time, you don't need this. If I go ahead of schedule, you might. There's a tin in the pantry marked oolong. Do not drink it. I do not invite you to make accusations. I invite you to be awake. If you find that you need help being awake, speak to Milton. He watched me be young, and he's seen me be old. This is not punishment, Owen. It's a seatbelt. Gee. I read it twice, then folded it along the creases he'd given it. Seatbelt, not punishment. I could hear him say it. Do you think? I started. We don't think anything, Amelia said quickly, and the lawyer in her came forward like a dog called to heel. We preserve evidence. We note concerns. We do not accuse without a foundation. Right, I said. Be awake. I called Milton. His voice was warm and dry like lumber in sun. He said he'd worked the ground since the first Darby rehabbed from shiny to timeless. He said he had keys to places that weren't supposed to exist and stories to match. Mr. Owen, he said, he trusted you, not because you were easy, because you weren't. Did Karina ever? I started, then stopped. Be careful with questions you don't want answered in a way you can't unhear. People don't like not being the center of gravity, he said. Sometimes they nudge the planet. Sometimes the planet nudges back. We arranged to meet at the townhouse. The library smelled like lemon oil and quiet. Milton showed me the wall safe behind a painting of a ship that never learned to sink. Inside were folders, each labeled with Glenn's tidy letters. There were lists of his meds, a printout of household access logs showing late-night entries to his suite 2 days before the heart attack, and a small paper bag from a boutique wellness shop in Back Bay. I'd walked past 100 times on my way to cheap coffee. The receipt showed loose-leaf tea blends and something called a cleanse concentrate. I'm a warehouse tech, not a chemist. Wellness marketing all sounds like the same penny in different pockets to me, but Glenn's letter sat in my mind like a hand on my shoulder. Be awake. I didn't run to the police. I didn't post a theory. I hired Glenn's private investigator, retired PD, with a jaw that looked like it had broken on the truth once and healed stronger. We kept everything civil, not criminal, not yet. We documented. We photographed labels. We saved till slips. We preserved camera footage the way you preserve fruit you might need in winter. I asked Amelia how much of this belonged in the probate file. Enough to keep the record honest, she said. Not enough to let it become theater. Meanwhile, Karina started her campaign. The first attempt came as nostalgia. A courier delivered a leather box to my old apartment. She still had the address because she had everything. Inside were photographs. Me and her at Revere Beach, my hair unfortunate, her smile real. Me in a tux that never fit right at a fundraiser where I held coats while she held conversations. Posted on top in her tight PR handwriting, we were good once. I placed the photos back in the box and mailed them to Amelia with a note, please log. I didn't write a message back to Karina. The clause didn't forbid thoughts, but it did forbid letters wearing thoughts like clothes. 2 nights later, she appeared outside my building like a ghost who'd read my schedule. She stood under the streetlight with her hands in her pockets, not approaching, just present. The clause said, no contact. Presence is not contact, I told myself, until she called my name. Owen, she said, gentle practice, talk to me. I stopped at the top of the stoop. I didn't move toward her. I didn't move away. I counted my breaths the way the seatbelt letter made me do. I can't, I said. You know why. She took a half step up. I raised my hand, not palm out, not rude, just a small stake in the ground. She froze, because she's always respected optics. This is ridiculous, she said, and the gentleness frayed. He's manipulating you. From the grave. Then he finally found a way to, I said. The next day, I got a typed note without a return address. You don't know everything. That was all. The kind of message that opens a basement door in your head and whispers you down the stairs. I brought it to Amelia. She looked at it under a lamp like a crime scene on TV. She wants to move you into reaction, Amelia said. Reaction is contact's cousin. At the townhouse, Milton handed me a second USB. From the outer camera, he said. Her visit 3 nights before Mr. Darby died. She went in through the garden, left through the service door. We watched the video in the library with the curtains drawn. Karina wore black and walked like she belonged everywhere. She moved to the pantry, out of the pantry, into the hall, part of her path blocked by our angle. She was on the phone for part of it, head bent, her free hand cutting the air the way it does when she condemns and redeems in the same sentence. The investigator found the wellness shop security footage. It showed Karina smiling at the counter staff, tapping her card, leaning in as the clerk wrote dosing instructions on a small card. Not proof of intention, not proof of anything but preference. But there was a tin in Glenn's pantry, and he had told me not to drink it, and the dead sometimes speak with the bluntest accuracy. I slept badly. When I did sleep, I dreamed the dog's sanctuary had a door I couldn't open. I stood on the wrong side listening to the sound of nails on wood, and I woke up with my heart thudding like a foundry. I went for a run in the cold and came home to an email from Amelia with the subject line, mediation. "She's pushing for speed," Amelia wrote. "Her counsel is requesting we sit down to discuss public statements and logistics. The clause will be part of the discussion." "Public statements," I said aloud to my empty kitchen, "because the public is the god she knows how to feed." I agreed to the mediation. The room was round, expensive, and humid with polite intentions. Karina came in with a scarf tied just so, not the widow's knot, but its cousin. Her lawyer was a man who could probably remove a spleen with a non-disclosure agreement. "Parenthetically," Karina began, before anyone offered an opening statement, "I want to say I never meant for this to be adversarial." "You filed before your father died," I said. "Feels adversarial." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss practicalities," he said. "Ms. Darby, Black is concerned about public misinterpretation. Mr. Black has never dealt with this level of scrutiny." "I dealt with your scrutiny," I said, "for 11 years. The mediator, a woman with reading glasses on a chain and the soft, dangerous voice of someone who understands how words become knives, reminded us of ground rules. We talked money without calling it money. We talked narrative control without calling it control. Karina tried to turn the clause into a morality play. I refused to rehearse a role I hadn't auditioned for. "I'm not trading on this," I said. "We issue joint statements declining to titillate. We close, we separate, we don't stage a war." 18 months pass, then the world can forget we happened. Karina's face did a small, private tremor. "18 months is a long time," she said, as if it were a desert. "Long enough to learn what the absence of you weighs," I said. "Long enough to put down the habit of being furniture in rooms you curate." She tried once more. "We can carve out exceptions, family events, holidays, if we agree." "The clause doesn't consult the calendar," I said. "Neither will I." The mediator wrote. The lawyers nodded, and the paper built itself up in the middle of the table like a wall we all agreed to live on either side of. Her lawsuit challenging the will landed with more noise than substance. She argued lack of capacity, undue influence, intentions mistranslated at the edge of death. Glenn had prepared for all of it. He had letters in his own hand, videos of his own voice, an army of dates and witnesses. He had Milton. He had that tin of oolong and the note that turned it into a question mark without turning it into a weapon. The judge's opinion read like the courthouse version of a shrug. The documents stand. The addendum stands. 18 months. Day 1, I woke up and said it out loud to my stove because it was the only witness that didn't have an opinion. Day 4, I took a train to western Massachusetts and followed a 2-lane road through bare trees to a sign that said sanctuary in hand-painted letters, no branding, just a direction. A woman at the gate asked me if I was there to volunteer or adopt. "Both," I said, not sure which truth had dragged me there. They took me to a pen where 2 older dogs lazed in the sun like they'd paid their dues. A shepherd mix with cloudy eyes stood slowly and put his head against my leg, careful as a man setting down a glass on a crowded table. A yellow mutt ears like question marks barked once, then sneezed and looked embarrassed. The volunteer told me their names. I tried them on in my mouth. Names that didn't care if my last name sounded richer than it felt. I signed forms. I learned about medication schedules and joint supplements and the kind of food that doesn't make old stomachs sad. I learned that 40% of a dead man's fortune could turn into warmth and clean water and a fence that doesn't break hearts. I learned that grief can be steered if you put your hands on something alive and stop letting your head pull all the weight. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a new email. No subject line, no greeting, 3 sentences. "You ruined everything." He would have listened to me. "You'll be back." I forwarded it to Amelia, and then, without reading it again, I printed it. At home, I put the printed page on the kitchen counter and set the adoption packet on top. Paper under paper, threat under promise. Then I took the email printout and used it to line the bottom of the box where I kept the dog's new leashes. That felt right. Some words deserved to be walked on. A month in, the nights got easier. Karina tried different angles, friends who just happened to be in town, a cousin who sent me a photo of us at Thanksgiving in a way that made me feel like I should apologize for growing old. Each time, I copied the message to the file, then did nothing. I became an expert at doing nothing with intention. It's harder than it sounds. It's lifting with stillness. At 3 months, I sat across from Milton at his tiny table in the gatehouse. He poured coffee that tasted like it had been waiting since sunrise. "You're doing it," he said. Doing what? Not turning the steering wheel into a weapon. "I want to," I said. "There are days I line up all the reasons and imagine showing them to people like weather forecasts. I want the world to agree with me." "The world is busy," he said. "Find a smaller jury." "Dogs?" I said. "Dogs," he said, and smiled with his eyes. At 9 months, I drove past the old townhouse. The lights in the library were on. In the window, I caught my reflection, and behind it, the fixed outlines of a life I no longer had to fail to fit. I thought of Glenn's letter. This is not punishment. It's a seatbelt. I let the thought buckle me in, then drove to the sanctuary and fell asleep on a bench with a gray muzzle on my knee, and my heart doing something I hadn't asked it to do in months, not ache. On day 541, the court dismissed the last of Karina's challenges with the polite severity only legal writing can manage. Her counsel issued a statement about respect for the process. Mine issued none, because silence was the only press office I could afford. On day 547, I sat in a different conference room with a mediator who didn't have to work very hard. Karina looked at me like a person looks at a locked door that used to open when she touched it. Her lawyer offered a handshake that wanted to be a favor. We signed what needed signing, planned a joint note declining to share details, and stood up. "I thought you'd come back," she said softly after the papers were in their folders. "I did," I said, "to myself." 18 months is over soon," she said, trying on a smile that didn't know where to sit. "Yeah," I said, "I noticed." "What happens then?" she asked. "I take 2 old dogs to a field and watch them pretend they're young," I said. "I make coffee that doesn't need to impress anyone. I learn what I like in a kitchen when I'm not waiting to be graded. I find out what silence weighs when it isn't imposed." "You think you won," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Money isn't a win," I said. "It's an exit." Her mouth moved like she had a line ready that didn't fit the scene. She settled for a nod that meant nothing and walked out, the echo of her heels turning a corner before she did. I stood a moment longer, listening to a clock in the hallway. Time, like a metronome, reminding me that even silence has a beat. The day the timer officially ran out, I drove to the sanctuary with a bag of treats and a mind like a room after a party, messy but no longer loud. The shepherd mix stiffly trotted toward me, and the yellow mutt pretended he'd never seen me before until I crouched, and he remembered everything. The volunteer handed me a donation receipt for a number I didn't say aloud. Glenn's claws had sent money here already in other ways, but this one was mine, not as penance, as direction. On the way out, I checked my phone. A single message from a number I didn't recognize came through as I hit the main road. It was a photo of Karina on a stage somewhere, framed by a branded backdrop, smiling the way people smile when they've told a room who they are. The caption said something about resilience. I saw the man with the gold loafers in the corner, half hidden by a speaker. The image would have gutted me 18 months ago. Now it was just proof that the Museum of Old Exhibits keeps its doors open, whether you visit or not. I pulled over at a diner in a town that doesn't care about last names. The waitress called me Han without audition, filled my coffee, and asked how old my dogs were when I showed her their picture. "Old enough," I said. The way people say long enough when what they mean is, I survived it. On the napkin, with a pen that bled a little, I wrote down 3 sentences to see if they looked true outside my head. I was furniture in her palace, some mercies cut clean. Money isn't victory, it's a door. I looked at the words until they stopped being lines and started being a map. On my doormat at home was an envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet. "You destroyed everything," it said, in a font that wanted to be important. I folded it, put it in the dog's box with the leashes, and took those leashes down the stairs. On the street, the shepherd leaned against my leg the way Glenn's hand had leaned on my shoulder from the past. The mutt sneezed at a dandelion and pretended it had insulted his mother. We walked to the field the way you walked toward a version of yourself that waited there the whole time, patient in the grass. What surprised me was not how quiet the world was after. It was how loud it had always been with things that didn't matter. Noise. You only notice when it stops. I don't know what Karina will do next. She's good at being seen, and some people need the light more than they need the warmth. What I know is that 18 months taught me that silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of yourself. You asked me what freedom costs? That's a weird question for a guy who once measured his day in pallets and scan beeps. But here's my invoice. It cost me a version of myself that waited for permission to exist. It cost me a house I never belonged in and a seat at a table where I was the quietest fork. It cost me the habit of mistaking someone else's plan for love. Expensive. Worth it. And if you're wondering whether I'd sign 18 months of silence again for a clear exit, I'll ask you this: how long would you hold your breath to be sure the next one you take is yours? What would you do? Would you sign 18 months of silence for a clean exit? Or do you think silence is just another word for running away? Where's your line between revenge and self respect? Drop your take in the comments, hit like if the story hit you back, and subscribe. There's another one already on the way.